Washington, where the impeachment of President Trump is happening right now. This is the House of Representatives. It's just done something historic. It has voted on the first article of impeachment, abuse of power, and the Democrats have won a majority. That means President Trump, no matter how much he objects, will forever be known as the third American president to ever be impeached. The second vote on the other article of impeachment is happening within minutes.
We need to talk about something absolutely critical happening right now with Donald Trump and Congress, because there is a massive amount of confusion circulating online about what is actually happening versus what people are assuming or exaggerating. And understanding that difference is essential if you want a realistic picture of where things truly stand. There are impeachment resolutions filed against Trump. There are members of Congress openly calling for his removal. There are constitutional mechanisms that could force him out of office. All of that is real. But has Congress actually voted for emergency removal? Has Trump been formally ordered to resign and refused? Is he being forced out of office right now? No. And separating what is real from what is speculative is the only way to understand what's actually unfolding. The machinery for removal exists.
This president only cares about the big stuff. And when he said, well, there's big stuff going on here, there's a war with Russia, Sondland explained, no, big stuff that helps him personally. The rest, our national security, our allies, none of that matters compared to what this president thinks is good for him.
The evidence of impeachable conduct is documented, but removal itself requires political will, not just legal tools, and that political will may or may not exist yet. That distinction matters. And before we go any further, let's be honest about something. You cannot rely on headline-driven media alone to understand this moment. Sensational framing gets attention, but it often distorts reality. That's why this show exists, to provide context, clarity, and substance instead of hype. If you want to actually stay ahead of what's happening, instead of reacting to misleading narratives, that's why engagement here matters. So let's walk through what is real right now. Multiple impeachment resolutions have been formally filed against Trump in the current Congress. These are not rumors. They are official congressional documents. House Resolution 353 is the most comprehensive. It lays out 7 separate articles of impeachment. Article 1 charges obstruction of justice. Article 2 charges usurpation of Congress's appropriations power. Article 3 charges abuse of trade authority and international aggression. Article 4 charges violations of First Amendment rights. Article 5 charges the creation of unlawful offices. Article 6 charges bribery and corruption. And Article 7 charges tyranny. That word tyranny is not commentary. It is the literal language used in a formal impeachment resolution filed by members of the House.
Some all but insisting that based on the evidence, Trump must be impeached.
What has happened in the case today is something that I do not think we have ever seen before. A president who has doubled down on violating his oath to faithfully execute the laws and to protect and defend the Constitution.
What we're talking about is an abuse of power. And we're talking about an abuse of power that only the president can commit.
President Trump has committed impeachable high crimes and misdemeanors by corruptly abusing the office of the presidency.
That resolution exists. It is currently sitting in the Judiciary Committee. It lays out a detailed case for impeachment and removal. It is specific. It is documented. It is written in the formal legal language Congress uses when it believes a president has committed high crimes and misdemeanors. This is not hypothetical. It is part of the official record, and that is not the only resolution. House Resolution 415 also accuses Trump of abusing presidential power and calls for impeachment. House Resolution 939 makes similar claims. These filings matter because they establish something important. A significant number of members of Congress believe Trump's conduct meets the constitutional standard for removal. They are creating a record. They are laying groundwork. They are documenting allegations that future Congresses, courts, and historians will not be able to ignore.
I called for the impeachment of Donald John Trump, President of the United States of America, for threatening judges and for calling for the execution of members of Congress. Now, there are many people who don't want to see this happen. They don't want to vote for impeachment. I've been told that this vote will take place sometime after 1:30 today. I assure you I'll be here for that vote.
There are also calls for Trump to resign. Individual members of Congress have publicly stated that he should step down voluntarily. Editorials and opinion pieces argue that he is unfit for office. Activist groups have organized campaigns demanding resignation. These calls are real. They exist in the political landscape right now. So when you hear claims that Congress is demanding Trump resign, there is a kernel of truth there. Some members are making that demand, but Congress as an institution has not issued a formal resignation ultimatum. That distinction matters. So here is where we need to be precise. Impeachment resolutions exist. Calls for resignation exist. Constitutional mechanisms for removal exist. But none of those things automatically result in removal. Filing a resolution is not the same as voting on it. Calling for resignation is not the same as enforcing removal. And having constitutional tools does not mean they are being used. To understand why, you have to understand what removal actually requires. There are only two constitutional paths. The first is impeachment. The House of Representatives votes to impeach by simple majority. If that happens, the Senate holds a trial. Conviction and removal require a 2/3 vote in the Senate. That means 67 senators, if all are present. Trump has already been through this process twice. In 2019, he was impeached for pressuring Ukraine. The Senate acquitted him. In 2021, he was impeached for inciting the January 6th attack. The Senate acquitted him again. In both cases, Republican senators protected him despite extensive evidence because they calculated that defying Trump would be politically dangerous. The second path is the 25th Amendment. Under Section 4, the vice president and a majority of the cabinet can declare the president unable to discharge the duties of office. That immediately transfers power to the vice president. The president can contest it, at which point Congress decides. To keep the president removed, 2/3 of both the House and Senate must agree. That mechanism has never been successfully used to permanently remove a president. It was designed for incapacity, not abuse of power, and it requires the president's own appointees to turn on him. Those are the only options, and both require extraordinary political alignment. Right now, that alignment does not exist. Republicans control the House. They are not going to bring impeachment resolutions to a vote. Even if Democrats forced the issue procedurally, Republican leadership would block it. And even if impeachment somehow passed the House, the Senate would still require 17 Republican votes to convict. That is extremely unlikely under current conditions. The 25th Amendment is even less likely. It would require Vice President J.D. Vance and a majority of Trump's cabinet to declare him unfit. These are people Trump appointed specifically because they are loyal. The idea that they would collectively destroy their own political futures by removing him is not realistic, regardless of Trump's conduct. So here's the reality. Removal is constitutionally possible, legally available, but politically blocked. Trump remains in office not because there is no evidence against him, but because partisan loyalty outweighs constitutional accountability. And that gap between what is documented and what is enforced is the most important thing to understand right now. This is where the story actually is, not emergency removal, not forced resignation, but a system under stress with mechanisms in place, evidence on record, and political will lagging behind. And what happens next depends entirely on whether that political will changes. What could change that political calculation is where this becomes important, because while removal is not happening right now, it is also not permanently off the table. There are specific conditions under which the situation could shift very quickly, and those conditions are not theoretical. They are rooted in history, political behavior, and how power actually works in Washington. The first factor that could change everything is a dramatic shift in public opinion. If Trump's approval were to collapse, not just nationally, but specifically among Republican voters, that would alter the incentives that currently protect him. Right now, Republican lawmakers fear Trump's base more than they fear backlash for defending him. That fear keeps them in line. But if polling were to show overwhelming support for removal, including among conservatives, that calculation flips. At that point, defending Trump becomes the politically dangerous choice. History shows that politicians follow survival instincts above all else. If protecting Trump threatens their careers, loyalty disappears fast. The second factor would be a precipitating event so severe that it breaks through partisan defenses. Something undeniable, something visual, something impossible to explain away. Not a slow drip of allegations, but a single act or revelation that even Trump's most loyal supporters cannot rationalize. Clear criminal conduct caught on tape. A national security catastrophe directly tied to Trump's decisions. An abuse of power so stark that denial collapses. These moments are rare, but when they happen, they rewrite political reality almost overnight. That is how Nixon lost support. Not because the evidence existed, but because the evidence became impossible to ignore. The third factor is coordination among Republicans. Individual defections do nothing. One senator breaking ranks gets destroyed politically, two get isolated. But if a critical mass moves together, the risk spreads and the cost drops. That is why leadership matters so much. Without signals from senior Republican figures that it is safe to abandon Trump, no one will go first. But if that signal ever comes, if enough senators decide collectively that Trump is a liability, removal suddenly becomes viable. It is not about morality. It is about coordination. The fourth factor is electoral change. The 2026 midterms matter enormously. If Democrats retake control of the House, impeachment becomes procedurally easy. They would not need Republican support to impeach. That alone would fundamentally change the political environment, even if Senate conviction remained unlikely. An impeachment vote forces senators to go on record. It dominates news cycles. It raises pressure. It shifts donor behavior. It creates instability that makes continued defense of Trump far more costly. This is why claims about Trump refusing to resign or Congress voting for emergency removal feel emotionally satisfying but miss the real story. Those are end-stage scenarios. They only happen after political conditions shift dramatically. Right now, we are earlier in the process. The foundation is being laid. The accusations are documented. The mechanisms are in place. The pressure is building, but the votes are not there yet. And this gap between evidence and enforcement reveals something deeply troubling about the system itself. The Constitution provides tools for accountability. Impeachment exists for a reason. The 25th Amendment exists for a reason. But tools do nothing without people willing to use them. When a president can face detailed allegations of obstruction, corruption, abuse of power, and tyranny, and remain in office because his party refuses to act, that is not a failure of law. It is a failure of political courage that has consequences far beyond Trump. It sends a message to future presidents that impeachment is not a real threat unless you lose your party. It tells them that as long as they maintain partisan loyalty, constitutional checks are effectively neutralized. That transforms impeachment from a safeguard into a symbolic gesture. And that is dangerous because it means elections become the only meaningful check on presidential abuse, and elections happen years apart. That is why accountability cannot be reduced to dramatic moments. It is built through sustained pressure, through elections, through public engagement, through forcing representatives to explain their votes, through making protection of misconduct politically expensive. That work is slower, less satisfying, and harder to monetize in viral clips, but it is the only thing that actually changes outcomes. Judicial accountability matters here as well. Courts do not need Congress to act in order to hold Trump accountable for crimes. Criminal convictions, civil judgments, enforcement actions, and court orders operate independently of impeachment. That is why Trump's legal battles matter, even when Congress stalls. Accountability does not come from one institution alone. It comes from multiple systems applying pressure simultaneously. And the historical record matters too. Even if Trump is never removed, the documentation of his conduct matters. It shapes how future leaders behave. It shapes how voters remember this period. It shapes how power is exercised going forward. Accountability is not only about punishment, it is also about truth. So when you see content claiming that Congress has demanded Trump resign or that emergency removal is underway, pause and ask what has actually happened. Impeachment resolutions exist. Yes, calls for resignation exist. Yes, constitutional mechanisms exist. Yes, but Congress has not voted to remove him. No resignation ultimatum has been issued. No emergency process has been triggered. Those things require political conditions that do not yet exist. Understanding that reality is frustrating, but it is necessary because it tells you where pressure actually needs to be applied. It tells you why elections matter, why midterms matter, why public engagement matters, why sustained attention matters. Removal is not something that happens because mechanisms exist. It happens because enough people decide to use them. And that decision has not been made yet. That's why it's so important to resist the temptation to believe that accountability will arrive suddenly in the form of a dramatic showdown. Democracies rarely work that way. What actually happens is slower, messier, and far less cinematic. Pressure builds unevenly. Institutions hesitate. Political actors wait to see which way the wind is blowing. And only when the cost of inaction becomes greater than the cost of action do things finally move. Right now, Trump remains in office not because the allegations against him are weak, but because the political incentives still favor protection over accountability. Republican lawmakers calculate that defending Trump is safer than opposing him. Cabinet officials calculate that loyalty preserves their careers. Party leadership calculates that delay is better than confrontation. Those calculations are not permanent. They change when voters change, when elections change, when consequences change. That is why public attention matters so much. When people disengage because removal feels impossible, pressure dissipates. When people believe exaggerated claims about emergency removal that never materialize, they become cynical and exhausted. Both outcomes benefit Trump. Accurate understanding is not just about being informed. It is about knowing where leverage actually exists. The leverage right now is electoral, not procedural. The leverage is public opinion, not viral speculation. The leverage is forcing representatives to explain why they are defending documented misconduct. The leverage is changing the composition of Congress so that impeachment becomes unavoidable rather than optional. That is how constitutional mechanisms move from paper to practice. It's also important to understand that accountability does not have to come in one form to be real. A president can remain in office and still be constrained. Court rulings can block policies. Civil judgments can impose financial consequences. Criminal cases can proceed even if removal does not. History can render its own verdict even when institutions hesitate. All of those things are forms of accountability, even if they don't satisfy the desire for immediate removal. But make no mistake, the current moment is not meaningless. The filing of multiple impeachment resolutions matters. The detailed articulation of charges matters. The fact that members of Congress are willing to use words like tyranny in formal documents matters. These actions create a record. They normalize the idea that Trump's conduct is not just controversial, but impeachable. That changes the baseline for future action. The real danger is not that Trump survives this moment. The real danger is that people conclude nothing can ever be done. That conclusion is what actually weakens democracy because it turns cynicism into resignation. And resignation is what allows power to operate without restraint. So the correct takeaway is not panic and not complacency. It is clarity. Trump is not being removed right now. Congress has not voted for emergency action. He has not refused a resignation ultimatum. Those claims are premature, but the conditions for removal are being discussed, documented, and debated in ways that did not exist before. The groundwork is being laid. Whether it leads anywhere depends on what happens next. The next chapter is written by voters, not thumbnails, by sustained pressure, not wishful thinking, by elections, not speculation, by whether representatives are forced to choose between party loyalty and political survival. That is where we are. Not at the climax, but not at the beginning either. We are in the phase where outcomes are still being shaped. And that is exactly when engagement matters most. Stay focused on what is real. Stay grounded in what actually moves power. And understand that accountability in a democracy is not instant, but it is not imaginary either. It only becomes real when enough people decide it has to be.